AITA for refusing to take in my estranged father after he abandoned me 20 years ago. I, 36F, have spent most of my life pretending my father doesn't exist. For context, my parents divorced when I was 7. My mom, Laura, and my dad, Mike, had a rocky relationship, and from what I've been told, their marriage was doomed before I was even born. My dad was never a family man. He was selfish, irresponsible, and had a tendency to blow through money like it was nothing. My mom tried her best to hold things together for my sake, but eventually, she realized that staying with him was doing more harm than good. After the divorce, my mom got full custody, and my dad was supposed to have visitation rights. At first, he made an effort to see me. He'd take me to the park or the movies, but even as a kid, I could tell his heart wasn't in it. He'd always seemed distracted, checking his phone, pager back then, or talking about how much he hated his job. Then one day, he just stopped showing up. No phone call, no explanation. He just disappeared from my life. I was 9 at the time. My mom did her best to shield me from the fallout. She worked 2 jobs to make sure we had everything we needed, and she never once badmouthed my dad. But as I got older, I started to piece things together. My dad had moved to another state with his new girlfriend, leaving my mom to pick up the pieces. He never paid child support, never sent a birthday card, never even called to check on me. It was like I didn't exist to him. For years, I struggled with feelings of abandonment and self-worth. Therapy helped, and eventually, I came to terms with the fact that my dad wasn't the person I needed him to be. I built a life for myself without him, a life I'm proud of. I went to college, got a degree in accounting, and now I'm happily married with 2 kids of my own. Fast forward to last month. Out of the blue, I got a Facebook message from my dad. At first, I thought it was a scam because I hadn't heard from him in over 20 years. But no, it was really him. His message was short and to the point. "Hi, my name, it's your dad. I know it's been a long time, but I'd like to reconnect. Can we talk?" I was floored. After everything he put me through, he had the audacity to act like he could just waltz back into my life. I debated ignoring him, but curiosity got the better of me. I responded, and we ended up having a long, awkward phone call. During the call, he revealed that he was in poor health and struggling financially. He had been diagnosed with a chronic illness that made it difficult for him to work, and he was on the verge of losing his home. He asked if he could stay with me and my family, just for a little while until he got back on his feet. I was stunned. This man, who had abandoned me without a second thought, was now asking me for help. I told him I needed time to think about it and ended the call. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. On one hand, he's my father, and part of me felt guilty for even considering saying no. But on the other hand, he's practically a stranger. Why should I put my family's stability at risk for someone who couldn't be bothered to care about me when I was a child? When I told my husband, he was 100% on my side. He said there was no way we were letting my dad move in, especially given his track record. My mom was also supportive and told me I owed him nothing. But then my dad started reaching out to other family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, and suddenly I was getting bombarded with calls and messages. They all said the same thing. "He's your father. You need to help him. Family takes care of family." One of my cousins even had the nerve to say, "I know he wasn't perfect, but everyone makes mistakes. You can't hold a grudge forever." That comment made my blood boil. This wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about protecting myself and my family from someone who had proven time and time again that he couldn't be trusted. I finally called my dad back and told him my decision. I said I was sorry he was going through a tough time, but I couldn't let him move in with us. I offered to help him find local resources like shelters or low-income housing programs, but he refused. He said he didn't want charity. He wanted family. When I stood firm, he accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. He said he had given me life, and the least I could do was give him a place to stay. That conversation ended with him yelling at me and hanging up. Since then, the guilt trips from my extended family have only gotten worse. They keep saying things like, "What if he dies? How will you live with yourself?" Or, "You're letting a little girl's anger cloud your judgment as an adult." I've been trying to focus on my own family, my husband, my kids, but it's hard to ignore the constant barrage of criticism. My husband keeps telling me I'm doing the right thing, and logically, I know he's right. But emotionally, I can't help but feel conflicted. Am I really being selfish? Am I letting my childhood pain blind me to the fact that my dad is a human being who needs help? I've always believed in second chances, but where do you draw the line? My dad didn't just make a mistake. He made a choice to abandon me. And now, after 20 years of radio silence, he expects me to drop everything and take care of him? It doesn't feel fair, but part of me still wonders if I'm being too harsh. So, am I the asshole for refusing to take in my estranged father after he abandoned me 20 years ago? Or should I have put the past aside and helped him, no matter how much it hurt? AITA for refusing to let my sister and her fiancé live with me after they tried to take over my house? I, 32F, bought my first home 2 years ago. It's a small but cozy 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for me and my dog, Charlie. I've worked hard to get here, college, countless late nights at work, and living in crummy apartments for years to save up for this place. It's my sanctuary, and I've put a lot of love into making it my own. My younger sister, Sarah, 28F, recently got engaged to her boyfriend, Ethan, 30M. I was happy for them at first. Sarah and I were close growing up, though we've had our differences as adults. Sarah is more of a free spirit. She's bounced from job to job and never really had a stable living situation. Meanwhile, I've always been the planner, the one who follows the rules and makes sure everything is in order. Despite our differences, I've always tried to be supportive of her. About 6 months ago, Sarah called me in a panic. She and Ethan were being evicted from their apartment. They hadn't been able to pay rent for a few months because Ethan lost his job and Sarah's part-time income wasn't enough to cover their expenses. She asked if they could stay with me just for a little while until they got back on their feet. She promised they'd only be there for a couple of months and that they'd help out with chores and bills. I hesitated, but ultimately agreed. I wanted to help Sarah, and I didn't want her to be homeless. I made it clear, though, that this was temporary and that they needed to actively work on finding a new place. I also set some ground rules. They'd have to contribute to groceries and utilities, clean up after themselves, and respect my space. At first, things were okay. Sarah and Ethan moved into the guest bedroom, and while it was a bit cramped having 3 people in the house, I managed. They even helped out with groceries and occasionally cooked dinner. But after the first month, things started to change. Ethan still hadn't found a new job, and Sarah wasn't picking up any extra hours at her part-time gig. Instead, they started spending most of their time lounging around the house, watching TV, and playing video games. Dishes would pile up in the sink, and their laundry was always scattered around the house. When I tried to bring it up, Sarah would shrug it off, saying they were stressed and needed time to relax. Then came the little power plays. They started rearranging things in the house without asking me. Sarah moved some of my kitchen items to better spots because she thought my organization system was inefficient. Ethan took it upon himself to turn my small office into a makeshift gaming room, claiming he needed a stress outlet. I was livid when I came home from work one day to find my desk shoved into the corner and his gaming setup taking over the room. When I confronted him, Sarah accused me of being selfish and said I needed to be more flexible. The final straw came about 3 months in. One weekend, I went out of town for a work conference. When I came back, I barely recognized my house. They had thrown some kind of engagement party while I was gone, without asking me. My living room was trashed, there were beer bottles everywhere, and someone had spilled red wine on my light beige couch. Worse, they'd rearranged my furniture to create more space for guests and hadn't bothered to put anything back. When I confronted Sarah about it, she didn't even seem apologetic. She said, "We needed to celebrate, and your house was the perfect spot. You weren't even here, so what's the big deal?" I couldn't believe her audacity. I told her that this was my home, not some party venue, and that their behavior was completely disrespectful. Sarah and Ethan got defensive. Ethan said, "You're acting like we're strangers. We're family, and family is supposed to support each other." Sarah chimed in, saying I was being uptight and that I needed to stop hoarding the house like it was some kind of museum. She then dropped the bombshell. They wanted to stay indefinitely. Sarah claimed it didn't make sense for them to move out when I had so much space and they were comfortable here. I was furious. I told them they had overstayed their welcome and needed to find another place immediately. Sarah started crying, accusing me of abandoning her in her time of need. Ethan called me a control freak and said I didn't understand what it was like to struggle. I reminded them that this arrangement was supposed to be temporary and that they had done nothing to improve their situation. They weren't looking for jobs or apartments. They were just freeloading off me. After a heated argument, I gave them a deadline. They had 2 weeks to move out. Sarah called me heartless and said I was prioritizing my precious house over her well-being. She even tried to guilt-trip me by saying I was setting a bad example for my nieces and nephews, which don't exist, by the way, since she doesn't have kids. Over the next 2 weeks, the tension in the house was unbearable. They barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was passive-aggressive comments about how I was kicking them out into the cold. True to their behavior, they didn't start packing until the last possible moment, and when they finally left, they didn't even clean up their room. I spent hours scrubbing the guest room and throwing out trash they left behind. Now Sarah is blasting me to our family. She's telling everyone that I threw her out and left her homeless. My mom called me upset, saying I should have been more patient and that I was being too hard on Sarah. My aunts and uncles have chimed in too, saying it's my responsibility as her sister to help her during tough times. Only my dad and a few close friends are on my side, saying I was right to set boundaries and that Sarah and Ethan were taking advantage of me. I feel conflicted. On one hand, I know I had every right to ask them to leave. This is my home, and their behavior was completely out of line. But on the other hand, I can't shake the guilt from the way Sarah framed it, as if I abandoned her when she needed me most. I've always tried to be a good sister, but I feel like I've reached my limit. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister and her fiancé stay after they tried to take over my house? Or should I have been more understanding and given them more time to get back on their feet? AITA for cutting off my brother after he ruined my career opportunity out of jealousy? I, 29F, have always been incredibly close to my older brother, Jake, 34M. Growing up, he was my hero. He taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, and always stuck up for me when kids at school were mean. We were a team, but as we got older, our relationship started to shift. I think it started when I got a scholarship to a prestigious university, and Jake didn't. He never said anything outright, but I could feel a subtle change in how he treated me. Little comments here and there like, not everyone gets handed opportunities like you do, or must be nice to have everything work out for you. For context, Jake has always had a harder time than me. He struggled in school, dropped out of college after his first year, and has been bouncing between jobs ever since. Meanwhile, I worked hard to get my degree, landed a good job in marketing, and have been steadily climbing the corporate ladder. I've always tried to support him, though. I've helped him with his resume, referred him to people in my network, and even loaned him money when he was in a tough spot. I thought I was being a good sister, but apparently, it wasn't enough. Last year, I was offered an incredible opportunity, a marketing director position at a company I'd been admiring for years. It was a huge step up in both salary and responsibility, and I was beyond excited. The only catch was that the job was in a different city, about 4 hours away from where I currently live. Moving wasn't ideal since I love my apartment and my friends here, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. When I told Jake about the job offer, he seemed happy for me at first. He congratulated me and said it sounded like a dream come true. But then he started making comments like, "Wow, you're really leaving everything behind for a job? And do you even know anyone in that city? What if it's a huge mistake?" I brushed it off as concern and assured him I'd thought everything through. A week later, I had an in-person interview with the company's CEO and senior leadership team. This was the final step in the hiring process, and I knew it was my chance to seal the deal. The night before the interview, Jake called me, saying he wanted to talk. He sounded upset, so I went over to his apartment to check on him. When I got there, he was visibly drunk. He started ranting about how unfair life was, how he'd worked just as hard as me, but never caught a break, and how I didn't deserve all the success I'd had. I was shocked. I tried to calm him down and remind him that I'd always been there to support him, but he wasn't having it. He accused me of looking down on him and acting like I was better than him just because I had a degree and a fancy job. I didn't know what to say. Jake had always been proud of me. Or at least, that's what I thought. Hearing him say these things felt like a punch to the gut. I left his apartment that night feeling hurt and confused, but decided to focus on my interview the next day. The next morning, I arrived at the company's headquarters feeling nervous but prepared. The interview was going well until the CEO mentioned something strange. He said, "We had a rather interesting email about you yesterday. I'm sure it's nothing, but I wanted to give you a chance to address it." My stomach dropped. I had no idea what he was talking about. Apparently, someone had sent an anonymous email to the company, claiming I was dishonest, unreliable, and had lied about my qualifications on my resume. They even attached fake screenshots of emails, proving I'd plagiarized marketing strategies from other companies. I was completely blindsided. I told the CEO the accusations were false and explained that I had no idea who would do something like this. He seemed to believe me, but the damage was done. The rest of the interview felt strained, and I left feeling like I'd blown my chance. Later that day, I got a call from the company's HR department. They thanked me for coming in, but said they decided to move forward with another candidate. I was devastated. This job was everything I'd been working toward, and now it was gone. I couldn't stop thinking about the email, and who would want to sabotage me like that? A week later, I found out. My best friend, Lisa, called me and said she needed to tell me something. Apparently, Jake had been venting to her boyfriend about how he felt like I was abandoning him by taking the job. In the heat of the moment, he admitted to sending the email to the company. Lisa's boyfriend told her because he felt guilty keeping it a secret and she thought I deserved to know. I was furious. I confronted Jake, and at first he denied it. But when I told him Lisa had already told me everything, he broke down and admitted it. He said he was sorry, but that he'd done it because he was afraid of losing me. He said he felt like I was leaving him behind and that he didn't know how to handle it. He even tried to justify his actions by saying it was a wake-up call for me to reconsider my priorities. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't a wake-up call, it was sabotage. Jake's actions didn't just cost me a job, they shattered my trust in him. I told him I needed time and space to process everything and left. That was 3 months ago. Since then, Jake has been reaching out, begging for forgiveness. He sent me long texts and emails, saying he regrets what he did and that he wasn't thinking clearly. Our mom has gotten involved, too, saying I should forgive him because he's family and that everyone makes mistakes. She keeps reminding me of all the times Jake was there for me growing up, as if that somehow erases what he did. But I can't move past it. Jake didn't just make a mistake. He made a calculated decision to hurt me out of jealousy. Every time I think about it, I feel sick. I've worked so hard to get where I am, and he tried to take it all away because he couldn't handle his own insecurities. I've stopped responding to his messages, and I've avoided family gatherings where I know he'll be. Now, some of my relatives are saying I'm being too harsh. They think I should give Jake a second chance and move on, but I don't know if I can. Trust is everything to me, and Jake destroyed it. Part of me feels guilty for cutting him off, but another part of me feels like I'm justified. So, am I the asshole for cutting off my brother after he ruined my career opportunity out of jealousy? Or am I being too unforgiving? AITA for refusing to help my childhood best friend after she tried to ruin my relationship years ago. I, 31F, have been with my fiancé, Tom, 34M, for 5 years. We're getting married in a few months, and I couldn't be happier. Tom is kind, supportive, and everything I could have asked for in a partner. This story, however, is about someone who used to be one of the most important people in my life. My childhood best friend, Emily, 31F. Emily and I were inseparable growing up. We lived on the same street, went to the same schools, and shared every secret. She was practically a sister to me, and I genuinely believed we'd be friends forever. But as we grew older, some cracks started to show in our friendship. Emily always had a competitive streak, but it started to feel less like playful banter and more like she was actively trying to one-up me. If I got an A on a test, she'd have to mention how she aced the entire class. If I went on a date with someone, she'd find a way to make it about her experiences. It was subtle at first, but over time, it became harder to ignore. Fast forward to my late 20s. I met Tom at a mutual friend's barbecue. We hit it off immediately, and after a few months of dating, I introduced him to my friends, including Emily. At first, she seemed genuinely happy for me. She'd make comments like, "Wow, you two are so cute together, and I'm glad you found someone who treats you well." But as my relationship with Tom grew more serious, her attitude shifted. Emily started making passive-aggressive comments about Tom. She'd say things like, "He seems a little too perfect, don't you think? No one's that nice," or, "I don't know, there's just something about him that feels off." I brushed it off as her being protective of me. After all, we'd been through so much together, and I figured she just wanted to make sure I was happy. Things came to a head about 3 years ago. Tom and I had just moved in together, and we were in that blissful stage of decorating our apartment and planning for the future. One day, out of the blue, I got a call from Emily. She sounded upset and told me she needed to talk to me in person. When I asked what was wrong, she said it was about Tom. I met her at a coffee shop where she dropped a bombshell. She told me that Tom had been flirting with her behind my back. She claimed he'd sent her flirty texts and had even tried to kiss her at a party we'd all attended a few weeks earlier. I was stunned. Tom had never given me any reason to doubt his loyalty, and the idea of him doing something like that felt completely out of character. When I asked Emily to show me the messages, she hesitated and said she deleted them because they made her uncomfortable. That immediately raised a red flag for me. Emily wasn't the type to delete anything. She'd always been the kind of person who kept receipts for everything. Still, I didn't want to dismiss her outright. I thanked her for telling me and said I'd talk to Tom about it. When I got home, I told Tom what Emily had said. He looked genuinely confused and hurt. He denied everything and even encouraged me to check his phone and emails if I needed reassurance. I did, and I found nothing. No flirty messages, no inappropriate behavior. Nothing to suggest he'd done what Emily claimed. At this point, I started to piece things together. I remembered how Emily had acted at that party. She'd been overly flirty with Tom, laughing at all his jokes, and even touching his arm a few times. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it seemed like she might have been projecting her own behavior onto him. I decided to confront Emily. I asked her if she was absolutely sure about what she'd told me, because I couldn't find any evidence to back up her claims. She got defensive and accused me of not believing her. She said something like, "I guess I should have known you'd take his side. You're so blinded by love that you can't see what's right in front of you." I told her that unless she could provide concrete proof, I couldn't take her word over Tom's. She stormed out of the coffee shop, and we didn't speak for months after that. During that time, I learned from mutual friends that she'd been telling people I was in denial about Tom's cheating and that I'd chosen a man over my best friend. It hurt, but I decided to distance myself from her for my own sanity. Over time, the truth came out. One of our mutual friends, Sarah, admitted that Emily had confided in her about having feelings for Tom. Apparently, Emily had tried to make a move on him at that party, and when he rejected her, she decided to spin the story to make him look like the bad guy. Sarah felt guilty for not telling me sooner, but I was just grateful to finally have clarity. I cut Emily out of my life completely after that. She tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored her. I couldn't trust her anymore, and I didn't see a path forward for our friendship. Fast forward to last week. Out of the blue, Emily sent me a long message on Facebook. She told me she was going through a rough time. She'd lost her job, was being evicted from her apartment, and had nowhere else to go. She asked if she could stay with me and Tom for a few weeks until she got back on her feet. I was floored by the audacity. After everything she'd done, she thought I'd just welcome her into my home like nothing had happened. I showed the message to Tom, who said it was entirely up to me, but that he wasn't comfortable having her in our house. I ended up responding with a polite but firm no. I told her I was sorry she was struggling, but that I didn't feel comfortable letting her stay with us given our history. She didn't take it well. She accused me of being petty and holding a grudge, and said I was punishing her for one mistake. She even dragged our mutual friends into it, trying to guilt-trip me by saying I was letting her become homeless. Some of our old friends think I should have let her stay, saying it's cruel to turn my back on someone I was once so close to. Others agree that she burned the bridge and that I don't owe her anything. My mom, who knows the whole story, says I did the right thing, but I can't help feeling a bit conflicted. I don't want to be heartless, but I also don't think I should have to invite that kind of toxicity back into my life. So, AITA for refusing to help my childhood best friend after she tried to ruin my relationship years ago. AITA for refusing to take in my brother and his family after they disowned me years ago. I never thought I'd be the person who had to draw a hard boundary. But here I am. I, 35F, am in a position where I feel like no matter what I do, I'll end up being the villain. I've been struggling with this for weeks, so I'm putting it out here to get an unbiased perspective. A bit of background. I grew up in a very traditional conservative family. My parents were strict, and appearances meant everything to them. I was the eldest of three, with my brother Paul, 33M, and my sister Rachel, 30F. Growing up, Paul was the golden child. He could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, and everything he did was celebrated like it was the pinnacle of human achievement. Meanwhile, Rachel and I were held to much higher standards. As long as Paul was happy, my parents were happy, and I learned early on that it was easier to stay in the background and not make waves. That strategy worked for a while, but everything fell apart when I came out as bisexual at 21. I hadn't planned to come out at that time. It slipped out during an argument with my mom about why I didn't have a boyfriend. The reaction was catastrophic. My parents were horrified, and my mom literally said, "How could you do this to us?" Paul, who was in college at the time, called me selfish and said I was trying to ruin the family's reputation. Rachel, to her credit, didn't say much, but she looked uncomfortable and avoided me for weeks after. The fallout was brutal. My parents gave me an ultimatum: renounce my lifestyle or leave. I left. I moved in with a friend, worked 2 jobs to pay for college, and essentially started over. For years, I had no contact with my family. Not one phone call, not one holiday card, nothing. It hurt, but I told myself I was better off without their judgment. Fast forward to about 5 years ago. I'd built a good life for myself. I have a stable career in tech, a house I'm proud of, and an amazing partner, Lily, 34F, whom I've been with for 8 years. Out of nowhere, Rachel reached out to me on social media. She apologized for how she acted and said she missed me. I was cautious, but we slowly rebuilt a relationship. Over time, I learned that she had distanced herself from our parents as well, though not completely. She wasn't ready to go no contact, but she admitted they were controlling and toxic. Paul, on the other hand, was still the golden child. He married his high school sweetheart, Lisa, and they have 3 kids. He's a lawyer now, and from the outside, their life seemed perfect. We hadn't spoken since the day I left home, and I assumed he was happy with that. That brings us to now. About a month ago, Rachel called me in a panic. She told me that Paul and Lisa were struggling financially. Paul had been laid off from his high-paying job, and they were drowning in debt. They'd recently been evicted and were bouncing between motels with their kids. Rachel said our parents couldn't, or wouldn't, help because they drained their savings on some bad investments. She asked if I could step in and let Paul's family stay with me temporarily while they got back on their feet. I was floored. Paul had made it abundantly clear that he wanted nothing to do with me for over a decade, but now I was supposed to open my home to him? I told Rachel I needed time to think about it. When I discussed it with Lily, she was firmly against the idea. She pointed out that Paul had never apologized for how he treated me, and that inviting his entire family into our home would likely be a disaster. I agreed with her, but the guilt was eating at me. These were my nieces and nephew we were talking about, and they hadn't done anything wrong. After a few days of agonizing, I decided to call Paul directly. It was the first time we'd spoken in over a decade. The conversation was awkward, to say the least. He sounded uncomfortable, but desperate. He explained their situation and said they just needed a couple of months to get back on their feet. I asked him point blank if he regretted how he treated me back then. His response? "I don't think this is the time to rehash old issues. We're in a crisis, and I thought family was supposed to help each other." That response solidified my decision. I told him I couldn't let them stay with me. He got angry and said I was being petty and vindictive. He accused me of punishing his kids for things that happened years ago and said I was proving our parents right by being selfish. I hung up on him after he said that. Since then, the backlash has been intense. Paul has been bad-mouthing me to anyone who will listen, painting me as some heartless monster who's leaving his kids homeless. Even Rachel is upset with me, saying I could have at least helped temporarily. My parents, predictably, are siding with Paul and saying this is exactly why they disowned me in the first place, because I only think about myself. The thing is, I don't think it would have been temporary. Paul has no job, no savings, and no plan. Letting them move in would have likely turned into a long-term arrangement, and I can't imagine the stress it would put on my relationship with Lily. But I also can't shake the guilt. I keep wondering if I'm letting my anger toward Paul cloud my judgment. His kids didn't do anything to deserve this, and I hate the thought of them suffering because of our family's history. So here I am, torn between protecting my peace and helping kids who had no say in any of this. AITA for refusing to let my brother and his family stay with me? AITA for refusing to sell my late grandfather's cabin to my cousin, even though she says it's her dream home? I, 36F, have found myself at the center of a family feud, and I'm not sure if I'm being unreasonable or standing my ground. I hope sharing this here will help me figure it out. My late grandfather owned a small, rustic cabin in the mountains. It's nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, and no modern luxuries like Wi-Fi, but it holds immense sentimental value for me. My siblings and I grew up spending summers there with our grandparents. Grandpa built it himself in the 1950s, and the cabin was his pride and joy. It's surrounded by woods, with a lake a short hike away. Some of my best childhood memories involve fishing with Grandpa, making s'mores by the fire, and playing cards on rainy afternoons. When Grandpa passed away 6 years ago, he left the cabin to me. My siblings, an older brother and younger sister, were fine with this decision, as they were never as attached to the cabin as I was. My brother is a city person through and through, and my sister lives across the country and has no interest in a property she'd rarely visit. They both said Grandpa made the right choice. Since inheriting the cabin, I poured my heart into maintaining it. It needed a lot of work, repairs to the roof, fixing the plumbing, and reinforcing the foundation. I took it all on because I love the place. I visit at least once a month, sometimes more, and it's become my sanctuary. I even host family get-togethers there during the holidays. Enter my cousin, Lauren, 34F. Lauren is my aunt's daughter and was close to Grandpa, but she didn't spend as much time at the cabin growing up. She liked it, sure, but she was more of a social butterfly who preferred beaches to mountains. Over the years, she's occasionally come to the cabin for family gatherings, but she never expressed any deep attachment to it. A few months ago, Lauren and her husband decided to move to a more rural area. They've been looking for properties with land, and apparently the cabin fits the bill. She approached me at a family barbecue in October and casually asked if I'd ever consider selling it to her. I was caught off guard and told her I wasn't interested in selling. She dropped it at the time, but a few weeks later, she called me and brought it up again. This time, she was more insistent. She said she and her husband had been searching for the perfect place, and the cabin was everything they'd ever wanted. She said it would mean the world to her to keep it in the family and raise her kids there someday. She even said she was willing to pay above market value. I told her I appreciated her interest, but that the cabin wasn't for sale. I explained how much it meant to me and that I planned to keep it in the family by passing it down to my own kids someday. Lauren seemed disappointed, but said she understood. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Lauren has since involved other family members, including my aunt and uncle, who are now pressuring me to sell. They've argued that Lauren has a young family and that the cabin would be better used by kids running around and enjoying nature, rather than me visiting once a month. My aunt went as far as saying that Grandpa would have wanted the cabin to be a family home for generations, not just a vacation spot for me. I stood my ground, which has only escalated the situation. Lauren sent me a long text last week, saying I was being selfish by holding onto the cabin when it's her dream home and could be a perfect place to raise her kids. She said she's willing to pay enough for me to buy another property, even suggesting I could get something nicer if I let it go. What stung the most was when she said I was letting my nostalgia and hoarding mentality get in the way of what's best for the family. She painted me as someone clinging to the past rather than making a decision that benefits everyone. To be clear, I don't want to sell. It's not about the money for me. I could never put a price on the memories I have there. The idea of strangers, even if they're family, living in the space where Grandpa taught me how to fish and told me stories by the fire makes me feel sick. I also don't fully trust Lauren to keep the cabin in its original state. She's mentioned wanting to renovate, add modern amenities, and even build a guest house on the property, which feels like it would erase everything Grandpa worked so hard to build. The situation has now divided the family. My siblings are on my side and have told me to stand my ground. They've said Lauren is being entitled and that I have every right to keep the cabin. My parents are more neutral, though they've subtly hinted that selling might be the easier option to avoid drama. Lauren's parents, meanwhile, have gone full scorched earth mode. They've accused me of being greedy and ungrateful, and have even said Grandpa would be ashamed of me for not prioritizing family. The guilt trips have been relentless. Lauren's parents have brought up the fact that I don't have kids yet, and said it's selfish to keep the cabin when Lauren's children could be enjoying it. They've also said I should be grateful that Lauren is offering me so much money, especially since I didn't pay a dime for the cabin. I've started second-guessing myself. Am I being selfish? Am I letting my emotions cloud my judgment? I know the cabin means a lot to me, but does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? Would Grandpa have wanted me to let it go so someone else in the family could enjoy it more? At the same time, I feel like Lauren's approach has been manipulative. If she had come to me respectfully and without dragging the entire family into it, maybe we could have had a different conversation. But the way she's gone about this has left a bad taste in my mouth. So here I am, turning to strangers on the internet for guidance. Am I the asshole for refusing to sell the cabin, even though it could make my cousin's dream come true? Or am I justified in keeping something that means so much to me? AITA, for refusing to financially support my parents after they cut me off years ago. This situation has been brewing for a while, and now it feels like it's reached a boiling point. I, 31M, am an only child and was raised by my parents in what I would call a conditional love household. Growing up, they were extremely strict, controlling, and demanding. They pushed me to excel in everything: school, sports, extracurricular activities, and expected perfection. Failure was not tolerated, and even success was met with criticism about how I could have done better. My parents had very rigid expectations for my future. My dad always said, "You're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. Anything less is unacceptable." He said it so often that it became a mantra. I was a pretty obedient kid, and I tried hard to live up to their expectations, even though it drained me. By the time I was in high school, I was completely burned out, but I didn't dare tell them. They were the type of parents who believed mental health issues were excuses for laziness. Everything came to a head during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to a few prestigious universities, and my parents assumed I'd be going to one of their top choices. But I had been secretly applying to schools out of state, far away from their influence. I had also decided I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I wanted to study computer science. When I told them my plans, they lost it. My dad yelled at me for hours, calling me ungrateful and a disappointment. My mom cried and said I was ruining my future and theirs. They threatened to cut me off financially if I didn't fall in line. I stood my ground and chose to attend a school across the country. True to their word, my parents cut me off completely. They told me I was on my own and not to come crawling back when I realized I'd made a mistake. It was brutal, but I was so determined to escape their control that I didn't care. I worked multiple part-time jobs, took out loans, and barely scraped by. It was hard, but for the first time in my life, I felt free. Over the years, I built a life for myself. I graduated with a degree in computer science, landed a good job, and worked my way up in my field. I'm now in a stable position financially and live comfortably. I met my fiancée, Emily, 29F, 3 years ago, and we're planning to get married next year. Life isn't perfect, but it's good, and I'm proud of how far I've come. My parents, on the other hand, haven't been doing so well. About a year ago, I heard through a family friend that my dad's business had failed and that they were struggling financially. I felt bad, but didn't reach out because we hadn't spoken in over a decade. Then a few months ago, my parents contacted me out of the blue. They apologized for how things went down and said they wanted to reconnect. I was skeptical, but agreed to meet them for coffee. The meeting was awkward. They didn't really apologize in a meaningful way. It was more like we did what we thought was best at the time. They asked a lot of questions about my life, my job, and Emily. I answered politely, but kept my guard up. At the end of the conversation, they hinted that they were having financial problems and could use some help. I told them I'd think about it. Since then, they've been calling and texting me constantly, asking for money. They've framed it as repaying them for all the sacrifices they made for me growing up. They've also guilt-tripped me, saying it's my duty as their son to take care of them now that they're in need. My dad even said, if it weren't for us, you wouldn't have the life you have today. This has caused a lot of tension between me and Emily. She thinks I should help them, but only to a limited extent, like covering a few bills or helping them downsize. She says it's not about them deserving it, but about me being able to live with myself. I understand her point, but I can't shake the anger I feel. They abandoned me when I needed them most, and now they expect me to bail them out? It feels hypocritical. I've tried explaining this to my parents, but they won't let it go. They started reaching out to extended family, who are now pressuring me to help. My aunt called me last week and said I was being heartless and that family comes first. She said my parents made mistakes, but that doesn't erase everything they did for me growing up. I told her that cutting me off wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and it had consequences. The guilt is starting to get to me, though. Part of me wonders if I'm being too harsh. They did provide for me growing up, even if their love felt conditional. And they're my parents. Doesn't that mean I owe them something? But then I remember all the times they made me feel like I wasn't good enough, and I get angry all over again. I've spent years building a life without their help, and I feel like I deserve to enjoy it without being dragged back into their mess. So here I am, torn between anger and guilt. Am I the asshole for refusing to financially support my parents after they cut me off when I was 18? Or should I set aside my resentment and help them, even if it means sacrificing my peace of mind? AITA for refusing to let my brother move in with me after he betrayed my trust years ago. I, 38F, am in a tough spot, and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. My younger brother, Sean, 34M, has reached out to me asking for help. He wants to move in with me because he's fallen on hard times. On the surface, it seems like the right thing to do, help family when they need it. But our history makes this far more complicated than it seems. Growing up, Sean and I had a typical sibling dynamic. We fought sometimes, but were generally close. Our parents weren't perfect, but they were loving and supportive. I was the responsible older sibling, always helping with homework or covering for him when he got into trouble. Sean was the more carefree, adventurous one. He had a magnetic personality and made friends easily, but he also struggled with boundaries and accountability. Things started to change when Sean was in his late teens. He began hanging out with a rough crowd, skipping school, and getting into trouble. My parents tried to intervene, but Sean was stubborn. By the time he was 19, he had dropped out of college after one semester and was drifting aimlessly. I was already living on my own and building my career, so I wasn't involved in the day-to-day fallout. Still, I always tried to be supportive, offering advice and checking in when I could. The real turning point came when I bought my first home at 27. It was a small house in a quiet neighborhood, and I was so proud of it. Around that time, Sean was going through a rough patch. He'd lost his job, his friends weren't reliable, and he had nowhere stable to stay. He asked if he could move in with me just until he got back on his feet. I hesitated because I knew Sean's history, but he promised he'd respect my space and contribute to the household. Against my better judgment, I said yes. At first, things were fine. Sean got a part-time job and helped out around the house. But within a few months, the cracks started to show. He began skipping work, spending all day playing video games, and bringing sketchy friends over without asking. I confronted him multiple times, and each time he promised to do better. But the breaking point came when I discovered that Sean had been stealing from me. It started small, spare change missing from the jar I kept in the kitchen, a bottle of wine disappearing from the pantry. But then I noticed bigger things. My laptop was gone, and when I asked Sean about it, he claimed he borrowed it to sell and would buy me a new one once he got paid. I was livid. I demanded he move out, but he begged for another chance, swearing he'd never do it again. I reluctantly let him stay, but I changed the locks on my bedroom door and started keeping my valuables hidden. It didn't end there. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find my TV and some other electronics missing. Sean admitted he had sold them to pay off a debt. That was the last straw. I told him he needed to leave immediately. He cried and begged, saying he had nowhere else to go, but I was done. I helped him pack his things and drove him to a friend's house. After that, our relationship was strained. Sean blamed me for giving up on him, while I struggled to forgive him for betraying my trust. We stayed in contact, but it was surface level. Over the years, Sean continued to struggle. He bounced between jobs, relationships, and living situations. Meanwhile, I focused on my own life. I built a stable career, got married to my amazing husband, Tom, 39M, and had 2 kids. Fast forward to now. Sean called me a few weeks ago and asked if he could move in with us. He said he'd been evicted from his apartment and was starting over. He claimed he'd changed and just needed a safe place to get back on his feet. My initial reaction was a firm no. I reminded him of what happened the last time I let him live with me and told him I wasn't willing to risk my family's safety or stability. Sean didn't take it well. He accused me of holding a grudge and said I was being unfair. He argued that it's been over a decade and that people can change. He even brought up how I've always been the favorite in the family and said it's easy for me to judge from my comfortable position. He also tried to guilt-trip me by saying that if the roles were reversed, he'd never turn his back on family. My parents have since gotten involved, and they're pressuring me to let Sean stay. They've argued that he's family and that it's my duty to help him. They've also downplayed what happened years ago, saying Sean was young and made mistakes but deserves a second chance. My mom even said, "What kind of example are you setting for your kids if you refuse to help your own brother?" Tom is fully on my side. He's seen how much I struggled to recover emotionally after Sean's betrayal and doesn't want to risk bringing that kind of chaos into our home. He's also worried about the impact it could have on our kids, who are still young and don't need to be exposed to Sean's instability. Sean has continued to call and text, alternating between apologizing and guilt-tripping. He says he's sober now, has a plan to get back on track, and just needs someone to believe in him. Part of me wants to believe he's changed, but the other part remembers how easily he broke my trust before. I also can't shake the feeling that my parents are enabling him by constantly bailing him out and expecting me to do the same. So here I am, torn between my own boundaries and my family's expectations. Am I the asshole for refusing to let my brother move in, even though he's desperate for help? Or am I right to protect my home and family, even if it means potentially damaging my relationship with Sean and my parents forever? AITA, for refusing to give my nephew the money I've been saving for years? I need to get this off my chest because it's caused a huge rift in my family. I'm honestly not sure if I'm in the wrong here, or if I'm being manipulated into thinking I am. I'm 45M, have been single for most of my adult life, and don't have any kids of my own. Instead, I poured a lot of my time, energy, and money into building a stable, comfortable life for myself. I've been saving aggressively for years with the goal of retiring early, traveling the world, and pursuing my hobbies like photography and writing. I've always been frugal, but that's allowed me to save up a decent amount of money over time. Now, here's where the issue begins. My sister, Karen, 43F, and her husband, Dave, 46M, have 2 kids, my niece, Lily, 16F, and my nephew, Josh, 18M. I've always been close with both of them, but Josh and I have a special bond. He's really into photography, just like I am, and I've spent years mentoring him and encouraging his passion. I bought him cameras, lenses, and other gear for birthdays and holidays. I even took him on a trip last summer to teach him about landscape photography. He's a great kid, and I've always been proud of him. Josh recently got accepted into his dream college, which specializes in art and design. He's ecstatic, and I'm genuinely happy for him. However, the school is extremely expensive, and Karen and Dave don't have the funds to cover it. They've always been a bit irresponsible with money, living paycheck to paycheck despite having decent incomes and prioritizing things like new cars and vacations over saving for their kids' education. Karen admitted to me a few years ago that they had no college savings for either of their kids, and were hoping scholarships or loans would cover everything. Last week, Karen and Dave came to me with a proposal. They asked if I would help pay for Josh's college tuition. When I asked how much they were expecting, Karen casually mentioned that the total cost for 4 years was around $200,000 and said, "Anything you can contribute would be a huge help." I was floored. That's not a small amount of money. It's the kind of money that would significantly impact my own future plans. I told them I wasn't sure and needed time to think about it. The next day, Josh called me. He was excited and thanked me in advance for helping him, saying his mom told him I was going to make his dreams come true. I was stunned. I hadn't even agreed to anything yet, and Karen was already making promises on my behalf. I didn't want to disappoint Josh, but I also felt incredibly uncomfortable with the situation. When I confronted Karen about it, she brushed it off and said she knew I'd come through because I love Josh like a son. She went on to say that I have more money than I need and that helping Josh would be the best investment I could ever make. I told her I hadn't made a decision and that it wasn't fair to put me in this position. She got defensive and accused me of being selfish, saying family should come first and that I'm prioritizing frivolous things like travel over Josh's future. This has turned into a full-blown family drama. My parents have chimed in, saying I should help because I'm in a better financial position than Karen and Dave. They've always favored Karen a bit, so their stance isn't surprising, but it still stings. My mom even said, "What's the point of having money if you're not going to use it to help the people you love?" I tried explaining my side, that I've worked hard for this money, that I have my own goals and dreams, and that it's not my responsibility to cover for Karen and Dave's poor planning. I also pointed out that if I give them this money, there's no guarantee they won't come back asking for more down the line. But my family isn't hearing it. They're treating me like a villain for not immediately agreeing to fund Josh's education. Josh, for his part, has been understanding. He told me he doesn't want to pressure me and that he appreciates everything I've already done for him. But I can tell he's disappointed, and it breaks my heart. I've even considered offering to cover a smaller amount, like $10,000, but I'm worried that would just open the door to more demands in the future. The whole situation has left me feeling incredibly conflicted. On one hand, I love Josh and want to see him succeed. On the other hand, I feel like Karen and Dave are trying to take advantage of me and are using Josh as a pawn to guilt me into bailing them out. It's not like I'm rolling in money. I've saved diligently, but I'm not a millionaire. Giving them $200,000 would wipe out a huge chunk of my savings and delay my retirement by years. I also can't shake the resentment I feel toward Karen and Dave for putting me in this position. They've had 18 years to prepare for this, but instead, they've lived recklessly and are now expecting me to clean up their mess. It feels unfair that their poor choices are being framed as my responsibility. So, am I the asshole for refusing to give my nephew the money I've been saving for years? Or is it selfish to prioritize my own goals over helping him achieve his dreams? AITA for refusing to let my parents move into my house, even though they're struggling? This has been eating at me for weeks, and I need some perspective. I, 38F, own a home with my husband, Mark, 40M. We've worked hard to build a stable and comfortable life, but my family is now pressuring me to do something that I feel deeply conflicted about. A little background. I grew up in a lower-middle-class family. My parents, Linda, 67F, and Joe, 70M, did their best, but they've never been great with money. My dad worked in construction, and my mom was a teacher's aide. While they made enough to get by, they had no concept of saving or financial planning. They spent money as soon as they got it, often on unnecessary things like expensive gadgets or vacations they couldn't afford. Growing up, I saw them live paycheck to paycheck and often rely on loans or credit cards to make ends meet. When I was younger, I didn't think much about their financial habits. But as I got older, I realized how precarious their situation was. I tried to help where I could, offering advice and even paying off some of their credit card debt when I was in my 20s. But no matter how much I helped, they'd end up back in the same cycle of spending beyond their means. I went to college, worked hard, and eventually built a successful career in project management. My husband works as an engineer, and we've always been careful with money. We save, budget, and invest wisely. After years of scrimping and saving, we finally bought a house 5 years ago. It's modest but perfect for us and our 2 kids, 8F and 5M. It's also in a good school district, which was a big priority for us. About a month ago, my parents dropped a bombshell. They called me, sounding distraught, and said they were being evicted from their rental home. They admitted they'd fallen behind on rent because they'd been using their money to pay off other debts, including medical bills and, apparently, a timeshare they impulsively bought a couple of years ago. Don't even get me started on that. They said they had nowhere else to go and asked if they could move in with us temporarily. This request immediately set off alarm bells for me. First, I know my parents. When they say temporarily, they really mean indefinitely. They have no savings, no assets, and no realistic plan to get back on their feet. Second, our house isn't huge. We have 3 bedrooms and both of our kids have their own rooms. If my parents moved in, we'd have to either cram both kids into one room or give up our home office, which Mark uses every day for work. I told my parents I needed to talk it over with Mark before making a decision. He was understanding, but firmly against the idea. He pointed out that my parents have a history of making poor financial decisions and relying on others to bail them out. He also worried about the strain it would put on our family dynamic. Mark grew up in a very different environment, where everyone was expected to take responsibility for their own lives. While he's always been supportive of me helping my parents in small ways, he draws the line at inviting them to live with us. When I called my parents back to say no, they were furious. My mom cried and accused me of abandoning them in their time of need. She said I was ungrateful for everything they'd done for me growing up, even though I honestly can't think of much beyond the basics of food and shelter. My dad, meanwhile, got angry and said it was my duty as their daughter to take care of them. He even brought up how they'd sacrificed so much to give me opportunities in life, which feels ironic given that most of their money went toward their own indulgences rather than my education or future. Since then, things have escalated. My parents have been calling me non-stop, leaving guilt-trippy voicemails and sending long texts about how hard their lives are right now. They've also started involving other family members. My aunt, my mom's sister, called me last week to say I was being heartless and that family should always come first. When I explained the situation, she said, "It's not like you don't have the space," which feels wildly out of line considering she hasn't offered to take them in herself. Even my brother, Mike, 35M, has weighed in, though his stance is more frustrating than anything. He agrees that our parents have made bad choices, but he also thinks I should suck it up and let them move in because I'm the one who's better off. For context, Mike lives across the country in a 1-bedroom apartment and barely makes ends meet himself. He's never been the one our parents lean on for help. It's always been me. The thing is, I don't want to sound heartless. I know my parents are in a tough spot, and part of me feels guilty for not stepping up. But another part of me is angry. They've had decades to get their finances in order, and they've consistently chosen not to. I've worked so hard to build a stable life for my family, and I feel like letting them move in would jeopardize everything we've worked for. I also worry about the example it sets for my kids. I don't want them to grow up thinking it's okay to make reckless choices and expect others to fix the consequences. I've tried suggesting alternatives to my parents, like looking into senior housing programs or even moving into a smaller, more affordable rental. But they've rejected every idea, saying they're too old to start over or that those options are beneath them. My dad even said, "Why would we live in a tiny apartment when you have a whole house?" At this point, I'm at my wit's end. My parents are still pressuring me, my extended family is judging me, and even Josh has started asking why Grandma and Grandpa can't come stay with us. I feel like no matter what I do, someone is going to end up angry or hurt. So, am I the asshole for refusing to let my parents move in, even though they're struggling? Or am I right to prioritize my own family's stability and boundaries over their demands? AITA, for refusing to pay for my sister's wedding after she demanded I cover all her expenses? I never thought I'd be in this position. I've always been the type to help my family when I can, and I've had a pretty good relationship with my siblings. But recently, everything has changed, and now I'm questioning whether I'm in the wrong for drawing a line. I, 30F, have a sister, Rachel, 28F, who is getting married in a few months. We've always been close, but there have been some things about her recent behavior that have rubbed me the wrong way. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and now I'm really questioning if I'm being unreasonable. Rachel's wedding has become a huge event. From the start, she wanted a grand, luxurious affair. Think 5-star venues, designer dresses, extravagant florals, the works. I've tried to be supportive of her vision for her big day, even though it's not the kind of wedding I would have wanted for myself. However, The problem arose when she started asking for money to cover the costs. Let me clarify that Rachel has always had a bit of a spoiled attitude. Growing up, my parents favored her. She was the youngest, and for some reason, they always gave her what she wanted. They'd buy her expensive gifts, pay for her college education, and even help her out with her rent when she first moved out. In contrast, I was the one who had to take out loans for college, worked multiple jobs during and after school, and now have a steady job where I can comfortably support myself. When Rachel got engaged to her fiancé, Mark, 30M, I wasn't surprised that she wanted an extravagant wedding. What I was shocked by was when she asked me to contribute financially. At first, she just asked if I could help with a few expenses, like the bridal shower or some decorations. I told her I could pitch in what I could afford, which was around $1,000. She seemed fine with that at the time, and we didn't discuss money further for a while. But then the situation escalated. About a month ago, Rachel called me and asked to meet in person. When we sat down, she dropped the bombshell. She told me that her wedding had gone way over budget, and her parents had already put in a substantial amount, but they weren't able to cover the rest. She said that if I really loved her and wanted her wedding to be perfect, I would have to step up and pay for the rest of her costs. She said she needed about $20,000 from me. I was taken aback. I asked her where she expected me to come up with that kind of money. I explained that I had my own financial obligations and couldn't afford to drop that kind of cash on her wedding. I've been saving for a down payment on a house, and while I'm not struggling financially, I definitely don't have an extra $20,000 lying around. She didn't take it well. She started crying and accused me of not caring about her or her happiness. She told me that if I truly supported her, I would be willing to help her make her wedding dreams come true, and that it wasn't like I didn't have the money to help. She even tried guilt-tripping me, saying that I was lucky I had a steady income and that it wasn't fair for me to hold back when she was asking for help. She then mentioned how much she's already helped me in the past, pointing out that when I was between jobs a couple of years ago, she let me stay at her apartment for a few months. She used this to justify why I should now help her out in her time of need. I'll admit, I felt guilty when she brought this up. I had stayed at her apartment during a rough patch in my life, and I was appreciative of her support at the time. But that was a completely different situation. She wasn't asking me to contribute tens of thousands of dollars back then. It was just helping me with rent while I got back on my feet. I tried explaining to Rachel that asking for $20,000 wasn't realistic or fair, especially given that I've been planning for my own financial goals. I told her I could contribute the $1,000 I initially offered, but anything beyond that was simply out of my budget. She got really upset, calling me selfish and cheap, and she even said that if I couldn't help her out this one time, I might as well not come to the wedding at all. That's when the conversation took a turn. Rachel told me that if I didn't give her the money, she would be extremely disappointed and might have to rethink our relationship. She said that weddings are once-in-a-lifetime events, and if I truly cared about her as a sister, I would find a way to make it happen. She added that it wasn't just about the money, but about showing her that I was there for her. When I told her I couldn't afford it and didn't think it was reasonable to ask for such a large sum, she hung up on me. Since then, our relationship has been strained. I haven't heard from Rachel much, and when I do, it's usually just a text, reminding me how disappointed she is. My parents have called me several times, trying to guilt-trip me into helping her out. My mom even said, "It's only money, and it's your sister's wedding. You can always save more later." But I don't see it that way. I feel like if I give her this money, I'll be enabling her entitled attitude and putting myself in a financially precarious situation. I also feel like my generosity has limits, and I don't think it's healthy to just throw money at someone because they expect it. Mark has been supportive of me, telling me it's okay to say no and that we shouldn't put ourselves in a bind for someone else's lavish event. But the guilt from my family, especially my parents, has been wearing on me. They're all saying I'm being too hard on Rachel and that I should just give her the money if I love her. I know weddings can be stressful, but this seems excessive to me. Rachel and Mark have both been pretty tone-deaf to the financial realities of the situation, and now it feels like the pressure is on me to fix it. So, AITA for refusing to pay for my sister's wedding after she demanded I cover all her expenses? Or should I be more understanding and find a way to help her out financially? AITA for cutting ties with my parents after they refused to acknowledge my boundaries. This situation has been brewing for years, and now I find myself at a point where I need to ask AITA for going no contact with my parents after they repeatedly crossed boundaries I had set. I want to explain the full story because it's not just one isolated incident, but a series of ongoing issues. To give you some background, I'm 28 years old and have always been a pretty independent person. I'm the type to value my space and mental health above all else. Growing up, my parents were loving but also very controlling. They had very clear ideas about how I should live my life, what career I should pursue, who I should hang out with, and even what I should believe in. Over time, I learned how to navigate their expectations and assert myself when needed, but it wasn't always easy. They never seemed to understand my desire for autonomy, and I often felt stifled by their constant need to be involved in every aspect of my life. When I graduated from college, I decided to move away to a different city for a fresh start. I landed a job that I loved and quickly built my own life with friends, hobbies, and my own personal routine. But my parents had a hard time accepting that I had grown up and wanted to live life on my own terms. Every time I came home for holidays or visited, I felt like I was being questioned or scrutinized about every decision I made. They would ask invasive questions about my relationship status, my job, and even my lifestyle choices. At first, I would brush it off, but over the years, it started to take a toll on me emotionally. The first real boundary I set was when I was 25. My parents had been pushing me to get into a serious relationship with a guy I had been casually seeing. They liked him, and in their minds, that was all that mattered. I, however, was not ready to settle down with anyone at the time. When I told them I wasn't interested in making things more serious, they didn't take it well. They accused me of wasting time and even suggested that I was too picky. This was the first time I stood firm in my boundaries, telling them that my relationship status was my business and they needed to stop pushing me. While that seemed like a one-off situation, things only got worse as the years went on. Every visit back home felt like a challenge to maintain my independence and protect my boundaries. They would make comments about my career choices, implying that I wasn't living up to my potential. They would also continue to criticize my personal life, especially my friendships, which they never seemed to approve of. It felt like nothing I did was ever good enough in their eyes. The breaking point came last year when I decided to take a 6-month sabbatical from work to travel. I had been planning this for years and had finally saved up enough money to take time off and see parts of the world I had always dreamed about. I was nervous about how my parents would react, especially since I had already dealt with their criticism of my career choices. But I was also excited about the idea of doing something that felt entirely for myself. When I told them, I expected them to have questions, maybe concerns about my safety, which is understandable. But instead, they launched into a full-blown critique. My dad started lecturing me about how irresponsible it was to take such a long break. He told me I was throwing away career opportunities and that I would regret it later in life. My mom got emotional and said she didn't understand why I couldn't just be happy with what I had. She told me that she was worried I'd come back and be lost and unfulfilled. They said I was being selfish and irresponsible by putting my personal desires ahead of my career and financial security. I tried to explain to them that I had planned this sabbatical carefully, that it was something I had always wanted, and that it wasn't going to ruin my future. But their reactions were dismissive. I was hurt, but I also knew I had to follow through with this trip for my own well-being. It wasn't just about travel. It was about asserting my independence and doing something for myself without feeling guilty. I ended up going on the sabbatical, and while I had an amazing time and came back feeling more centered, the tension with my parents only grew. When I returned, they barely acknowledged my experiences, and when I tried to share stories of the places I had visited, they seemed uninterested. Instead, they launched into more discussions about my career and finances. At that point, I was fed up. It felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't win in their eyes. The final straw came when I told them I was planning on moving in with my boyfriend, Mark, 30M. We had been together for over 2 years, and it felt like the right next step for both of us. When I shared the news with my parents, their reaction was extreme. My mom started crying, saying that I was throwing away my independence and that I was making a huge mistake. My dad, while more passive, basically echoed the same sentiment. He said I was making a rash decision and that I should wait longer before taking such a big step. They asked questions like, "How will you afford this?" And "What if it doesn't work out?" The pressure to justify my decision was overwhelming. At this point, I was done. I had spent years trying to appease them, trying to maintain a relationship, but their lack of respect for my boundaries and my autonomy had become too much. I had tried to explain myself, tried to set limits on what I would discuss with them, but every time I did, they would either ignore or dismiss my feelings. I knew they wouldn't change. So, I made the decision to go no contact for a while to give myself some space and peace. I haven't spoken to them in 6 months. I've ignored their calls, and while I've had some guilt about it, I know it was the right decision for my mental health. I feel like I can finally breathe without the constant pressure from them. Mark has been supportive throughout this whole process, understanding my need for space. My friends have also been understanding, but some of my extended family members have reached out to say that I'm being too harsh and shouldn't be cutting ties over this. They think I should give my parents a chance to change, and that I'm overreacting. My sister, in particular, has been giving me a hard time, telling me that family is everything and that I should just forgive them. I don't know what to do. Part of me feels guilty for not trying harder to repair the relationship, but another part of me feels that I've already done enough. I've spent years trying to accommodate them, trying to maintain a relationship despite their refusal to respect my boundaries. At this point, I feel like I'm protecting myself from further emotional damage. I'm questioning whether I'm being unreasonable by choosing to cut ties, especially since my parents are getting older, and I might regret this decision later on. So, AITA for going no contact with my parents after years of them crossing my boundaries? Or should I be trying harder to make things work? AITA for refusing to pay for my sister's wedding after she tried to exclude my son? I'm a 36-year-old woman, and I have an 8-year-old son, Lucas, who is my absolute pride and joy. I'm also the eldest of 3 siblings. My brother, Alex, is 34, and my younger sister, Emma, is 30. Recently, Emma got engaged, and she's been planning her wedding for a few months now. I've been looking forward to it because Emma is my little sister, and I always assumed that our family would be there for her no matter what. However, things took a sharp turn when Emma made it clear that she didn't want my son, Lucas, at her wedding. Let me explain how this all unfolded. At first, the wedding planning seemed pretty standard. Emma was excited, and she kept asking us for input on everything from the venue to the color scheme. Everything was going smoothly until one day, Emma and I were talking about the guest list, and she casually mentioned that she was keeping the number of children at the wedding very low. I was a little confused because, obviously, my son is a huge part of my life, and I couldn't imagine not having him with me on such a big occasion. When I asked her about it, she told me that she didn't want any kids at the wedding because it's a grown-up event, and she wanted the focus to be on the adults, not running after children all day. I tried to be understanding at first, but when she said, "No offense, but I don't want kids like Lucas at my wedding," I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried to let it go, but it bothered me. My son is well-behaved, polite, and he knows how to act in social situations. He's a little shy at first, but he's not disruptive in any way. He has attended family events without any problems in the past, and I couldn't figure out why she would single him out. I texted Emma later to ask if she was serious, and I told her that I couldn't come to the wedding without my son. She responded with something along the lines of, "I understand that you're a mom, but this is my special day, and I want to enjoy it without worrying about kids running around." This response really upset me. I understand that weddings are a big deal, but we're family. The idea of being excluded from a family wedding, especially after everything we've been through, felt like a slap in the face. I spoke to my husband, and he was equally upset. We both agreed that Emma had no right to make me choose between attending her wedding and bringing my son. I then called my sister and told her that I couldn't accept her decision to leave my son out of the wedding. I asked her to reconsider and told her that Lucas was my responsibility, and it was unfair to expect me to come without him. She was adamant, saying that this was her wedding and she wasn't going to change the guest list just to accommodate one child. I felt hurt, but I wasn't going to beg her to change her mind. I told Emma that if Lucas couldn't come, then I couldn't attend either. I let her know that it wasn't about the wedding, but about how important it was for me to have my son with me at family events. She became upset and said that I was being dramatic and that I was ruining her special day. From there, the situation only escalated. Emma began telling our family members that I was being unreasonable and that I was putting my son's needs above her wedding. My parents tried to stay neutral at first, but as the days passed, they sided with Emma. They said I was being stubborn and selfish for making a stand on this issue. My brother Alex also agreed with Emma and said that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. As the wedding day approached, Emma started pressuring me again, sending me messages about how she was trying to have the best day of her life, and I was making it all about my son. She even suggested that I leave Lucas with a babysitter and attend the wedding alone, which I found completely insulting. I told her that if I was excluded from the wedding because of my son, I would rather not attend at all. The final straw came when Emma told me that if I didn't attend her wedding without Lucas, she wouldn't want me involved in any future family events. She said, "This is my wedding, and if you can't respect my wishes, then maybe you shouldn't be part of my life anymore." At that point, I was done. I realized that no matter how much I tried to explain my side, Emma had already made up her mind. I didn't feel like I could be part of her special day if it meant sacrificing my relationship with my son. I decided that I wouldn't attend her wedding, and I told her that. Now, the whole family is upset with me. My parents are calling me selfish, and my brother is texting me nonstop, telling me that I've made a huge mistake. Some extended family members are even telling me I'm being dramatic and that I should just get over it. Emma, of course, is furious and says that I've ruined her wedding by making it all about myself. I feel torn because I never wanted to cause a rift in the family, but at the same time, I refuse to be treated like my son doesn't matter. He's my child, and I shouldn't have to choose between him and my family. But now I'm being called all kinds of names, and I feel like the villain in this situation. So, AITA for refusing to pay for my sister's wedding after she tried to exclude my son? AITA for refusing to let my best friend bring her boyfriend to my wedding after he disrespected me? I, 30F, am getting married in 3 months to my fiancé, Dave, 32M. We've been together for 4 years, and our wedding planning has been going pretty smoothly, aside from a few small bumps in the road. One of those bumps is related to my best friend, Sarah, 30F, and her boyfriend, Ryan, 31M. The situation has caused a lot of tension, and now my entire friend group is divided, and I'm starting to feel like I'm in the wrong. To give some context, Sarah and I have been best friends for over 15 years. We met in high school, and despite a few ups and downs, we've always had each other's backs. When I got engaged, Sarah was one of the first people I told, and she was thrilled for me. She's always been supportive, and I honestly expected her to be one of my maid of honor's right hand. However, things took a turn about a month ago during a casual dinner at my place. Sarah brought Ryan along, and at first everything was fine. We were all laughing, chatting, and eating. I had met Ryan a few times before, and while I didn't know him well, he seemed nice enough. But as the evening wore on, something happened that really bothered me. At some point during the conversation, the topic of weddings came up, and I mentioned some of the details of our upcoming ceremony. I've been super excited about our wedding, and we've put a lot of time, effort, and thought into making it special. We're having a small, intimate ceremony with a simple reception, but we've chosen to splurge on a few key things like the venue and photography. I was telling the group about how Dave and I had spent a lot of time choosing the right photographer because we wanted the photos to reflect our personalities and the vibe of our relationship. That's when Ryan, without missing a beat, chimed in with, "I can't believe people still waste so much money on weddings. It's literally just a day." At first, I thought it was a joke, but then he continued, "Honestly, the whole wedding industry is a scam. You guys are just throwing money away. You'll probably regret all the money you spent once the honeymoon's over." I felt a little taken aback, but I tried to brush it off. I said something along the lines of, "Well, it's important to us, and it's our choice." But Ryan wasn't done. He went on to criticize everything from the food to the flowers, even the venue. At this point, I was starting to get uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. I turned to Sarah to see if she would say something, but she didn't. Instead, she just sat there looking awkward. Ryan kept going, it's just crazy how much people throw away for one day. If I were you, I'd put that money towards something that actually lasts. By this point, the whole conversation had taken a weird turn, and I felt like Ryan was just being rude for the sake of being rude. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to cause drama in front of my best friend. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I felt disrespected and hurt that Ryan, someone who I barely knew, felt comfortable making those comments about my wedding. I felt even worse that Sarah didn't stand up for me or say anything to defend me. I talked to Dave about it, and he agreed that Ryan's comments were out of line. But we both decided not to make a big deal out of it at the time and to just move on. But the issue didn't go away. As the wedding day approached, I started feeling more and more uncomfortable with the idea of having Ryan at the wedding. He had been disrespectful, and Sarah hadn't done anything to address it. I didn't want to start conflict, but I also didn't want someone who had insulted me to be part of such an important day in my life. After discussing it with Dave, we both agreed that it would be best if Ryan didn't come to the wedding. I texted Sarah, explaining that while I valued our friendship, I didn't feel comfortable having Ryan attend after the comments he made. I told her that I hoped she understood and that I wanted her to be there, but it was important to me that my wedding day wasn't clouded by negativity. Sarah's response was immediate and emotional. She texted me back saying, "You're seriously going to uninvite Ryan? He was just being honest, and you're overreacting. I can't believe you're doing this." I tried to remain calm and explained that it wasn't about honesty. It was about respect. I told her that I didn't expect her to choose between me and Ryan, but I needed to set boundaries for my own peace of mind. I also told her that if she couldn't come without him, I would respect that, but it would make things very difficult for me. The conversation quickly escalated. Sarah started accusing me of being controlling, saying that I was ruining our friendship over something so trivial. She said that I was being petty and that I shouldn't let one comment ruin our entire relationship. I explained that it wasn't just about the comment. It was about how Ryan had disrespected me in front of my friends and family and how Sarah hadn't stepped in to defend me. I also pointed out that I had never disrespected her or her relationships, and that I thought she should be able to see where I was coming from. The text exchange ended with her telling me that if I wasn't going to allow Ryan at the wedding, then she wasn't sure if she could come either. She said she didn't want to be a part of a wedding where she wasn't allowed to bring her boyfriend, and that she felt betrayed by my decision. I was heartbroken. Sarah and I had been through so much together, and I never imagined she would let something like this come between us. The next few days were a blur of back-and-forth messages, with Sarah accusing me of being selfish and unreasonable, while I tried to explain my position calmly. Eventually, Sarah told me that she couldn't attend the wedding if Ryan wasn't invited, and I had to respect her decision. I was devastated. I felt like I was losing my best friend over something I felt was completely reasonable. Now, I'm at a crossroads. My wedding is getting closer, and Sarah hasn't spoken to me since that last exchange. I've been getting messages from other friends telling me that I'm being too harsh and that I should just let it go. Some people think I should have just allowed Ryan to come and let Sarah bring her boyfriend without making a big deal out of it, but I can't help but feel like my feelings were completely valid. I didn't ask for Ryan to be rude, and I didn't ask for Sarah to be silent while it happened. At the same time, I don't want to lose my best friend over this. So, AITA for refusing to let my best friend bring her boyfriend to my wedding after he disrespected me. AITA for refusing to let my sister stay with me after she disrespected my parenting choices. I, 34F, am a mother of 2 kids, Ava, 7F, and Noah, 5M, and my husband, Jake, 36M, and I have worked hard to build a life that works for us. We live in a modest home in a suburban neighborhood, and while we don't live extravagantly, we're comfortable. My sister, Rachel, 30F, on the other hand, has always lived a more spontaneous, free-spirited life. She doesn't have kids, and her approach to life is very different from mine. Rachel and I have always had a decent relationship, but it's become a lot more strained since I had children, especially when it comes to parenting. Rachel has no kids of her own, and I respect that she doesn't understand the challenges that come with raising children, but she's always had a lot of opinions about how I should raise mine. She often criticizes the way I handle certain situations, especially when it comes to discipline, food, and screen time. I try not to let it get to me because I know she's just trying to help, but sometimes it feels like she doesn't respect the way Jake and I have chosen to raise our kids. We do our best to make decisions that are in their best interest, but Rachel doesn't always agree with our choices. Recently, Rachel reached out and asked if she could come visit for a few days. She said she wanted to see the kids and catch up, and while I was hesitant because of her judgmental attitude, I agreed. I figured that having her stay would be a good opportunity to work through some of the tension between us, and it would be nice to have her around for a bit. The kids were excited at the idea of Aunt Rachel staying with us, and I didn't want to say no and cause drama. Things started off fine enough. Rachel arrived, and we spent the first couple of days just hanging out, playing board games with the kids, and doing some family activities. However, as the days went on, it became clear that Rachel was still making comments about how I was raising my children. The first issue came when Ava and Noah had a snack one afternoon. I had given them fruit and cheese, which is one of their favorite healthy snacks. Rachel made a face when she saw it and asked, "Is that all they get? Don't you give them any junk food?" I explained that we try to limit junk food in our house and focus on balanced meals, and she responded with, "Well, that's not very fun for them, is it?" I tried to let it slide, but it kept happening. The next day, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Rachel walked in and asked if I was really going to feed the kids that bland stuff again. I was making a simple chicken stir-fry with vegetables, which my kids love. But Rachel started to lecture me about how kids need to have more variety in their diets, and how I was being overly strict with what they ate. She even mentioned that I was being too controlling and that I needed to let them have more freedom when it came to food choices. I was frustrated, but I tried to keep my cool. I politely explained that I didn't want to raise my kids on a diet of processed foods and that I believed in teaching them healthy habits. Rachel didn't seem convinced and made it clear that she thought I was being too rigid. I felt like I was being judged for simply trying to provide healthy meals for my kids, and it was starting to get under my skin. The next issue came up when I set limits on screen time for the kids. Ava and Noah love watching TV and playing games on their tablets, but I only allow them to do so for a limited time each day. I make sure they're active, get outside, and spend time with us as a family. Rachel, however, immediately started questioning my rules. She asked why I didn't just let them watch as much TV as they wanted, and said that it wasn't a big deal if they were on their devices all day. I tried to explain that I wanted to encourage them to develop other interests and spend time doing activities that were more engaging, but Rachel brushed me off and said, "You're just being paranoid. Kids need downtime too." It wasn't just the food and screen time. Rachel also criticized the way I handled discipline. One day, Ava got into trouble for not cleaning up her toys after I asked her several times. I gave her a timeout, and Rachel immediately jumped in, asking, "Why do you always resort to timeouts? Isn't there a better way to handle this?" She went on to tell me that I needed to be more lenient with Ava and that I shouldn't punish her for small things. I calmly explained that I was trying to teach Ava responsibility and that there were consequences for not following rules, but Rachel didn't seem to understand. She told me that I was too harsh and that I needed to find a better way to discipline my children without making them afraid of me. By the fourth day, I was feeling completely drained. Rachel was still making comments about my parenting, and I could feel the tension building. I had tried to have a few calm conversations with her about how her comments were making me feel, but she just seemed to dismiss my feelings and insist that she was only trying to help. It wasn't just about her opinions. It was about the way she was constantly undermining the choices Jake and I had made as parents. I was starting to feel like she was disregarding my authority as their mother and trying to take over in her own way. The final straw came when Rachel decided to take the kids to a nearby park without asking me first. I had planned a family outing for that afternoon, but Rachel decided she would just take them herself. She said that she wanted to let them have fun without all the rules and that she would let them do whatever they wanted. I wasn't okay with this. I felt that she was disregarding my boundaries and undermining my role as their parent. I asked her to wait until we could all go together, but she insisted that I was being controlling and that I needed to lighten up. That night, after Rachel came back with the kids, I sat down with her and told her that I was no longer comfortable with her staying at our house. I explained that while I loved her, her constant criticism of my parenting had become too much. I told her that I didn't appreciate how she was undermining my authority as a mother, and that I needed her to respect the way Jake and I were raising our kids. Rachel was shocked. She immediately started getting defensive, saying that I was being too sensitive and that I shouldn't take everything she said so seriously. She said that she was just trying to help and that I was overreacting. At that point, I had reached my limit. I told Rachel that I didn't think it was healthy for either of us to continue this visit, and that I felt it was best if she left. I told her that I loved her, but that she needed to respect my parenting choices and my role as a mother. Rachel was furious. She accused me of kicking her out and said that I was being unreasonable and controlling. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard not to feel hurt by her response. She left the next day, and things have been awkward between us ever since. Our parents are now involved, and they think I overreacted. They've said that Rachel was just trying to be helpful and that I should have been more patient with her. But I feel like I was more than patient, and I don't think it's fair for her to undermine me in front of my kids. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister stay with me after she disrespected my parenting choices?